So, welcome to tonight's program. It's about electric and hybrid cars, which we think are great options for your next vehicle. My name is Mike Edding, and I'm joined tonight by Susan McBride, my colleague, and we both work in the Adult Services Department at the library in Hinsdale. Over the last 20 to 25 years, hybrids and electric cars have become commercially available on a wide scale. And tonight we'll talk about why you might consider one, the various options available to you, and the direction the market seems to be headed. Well, the first question is why might you choose a car like this? So, the kinds of cars we're talking about tonight all use some sort of electric motor in the powertrain, and collectively, they're called electrified vehicles, which seems like a strange name to me, but that's what they're called. Um, and the first reason you might consider a vehicle like this is fuel economy. Each of the car types that we'll discuss tonight provides a lower cost of fuel per mile than traditional gasoline engines. In an electric vehicle, your fuel costs may be as much as 3 times lower than with a traditional gasoline motor. The second reason that a lot of people consider these is for government financial incentives. And these usually take the form of a non refundable federal tax credit, but some states offer tax credits as well. You're eligible for up to $7,500 if you choose the right vehicle by the right manufacturer and you have a tax liability. So check with your accountant to see if you might be eligible. These incentives do not happen at the point of sale, which is important to remember. They happen when you file your taxes. So the only exception to that
Okay,
is
thank you.
in some cases, if you lease a vehicle that is electric or a plug-in hybrid, sometimes the manufacturer will roll in that tax credit into your payment, so giving you sort of credit for it. But again, it would have to be a vehicle that was eligible. And financial incentives are not available for all cars. So if you want to take a look at the link on the bottom of the page at your leisure, you'll get more information on each specific model that's being sold in the United States now and how much you might be eligible up to. And the third reason you might want to consider an electrified vehicle is for environmental reasons. The more a car relies on electric propulsion, the lower the emissions of the car as you're operating it. So in general, all of these types of cars are better for the environment over their lifespan than their gasoline powered cars. So again, the more a car is using electric power, the lower the fuel cost per mile. And it's sort of, if you look at these vehicles in ascending order of fuel economy, it goes from the hybrid to the plug-in hybrid to the electric vehicle. So the options that you might consider fall into those three categories. And each of them have an electric motor and a battery, but there are some important differences between them. First up are hybrids. So we're all familiar with the original Toyota Prius, which became sort of the poster child for an entire segment of cars shortly after it went on sale about 20 years ago. Hybrids like the standard Prius have a medium-sized gas engine, which is supplemented by an electric motor powered by a small battery. So you can sort of see the difference in the size of batteries in the diagram there. So when you accelerate gently in a hybrid, the car switches over to the electric motor from the gasoline motor, and it's a more cost-effective or cost-efficient source of power than gasoline. And clever engineering allows the car's computer to decide every fraction of a second which powertrain portion should take over, essentially. I think it's important at this point to stop for just a second and consider the batteries which go into these cars. And they're measured in terms of how many kilowatt hours they store. So if you think of a 1,000 watt microwave oven, which really is a 1 kilowatt microwave oven, if you run it for 1 hour, that uses 1 kilowatt hour of power. And the battery in a standard hybrid is quite small, and it's generally large enough to store maybe 1 or 2 kilowatt hours of energy. But a plug-in hybrid, in contrast, has a much larger battery. It's about 10 times larger than a standard hybrid battery, in fact. So this bigger battery and the electric motor work in conjunction with sort of a medium-sized gasoline engine. And they differ from standard hybrids in that they can be plugged in for recharging, whereas traditional hybrids no plug-in. The battery's small enough that it can be recharged as you drive. So nowadays, plug-in hybrids can run on electric-only power for 20 to 50 miles, which can meet the daily needs of many drivers. So the battery power for a regular hybrid will last maybe 1 mile of driving, but a plug-in hybrid can go for 20 to 50 miles on battery power, which is an important distinction. The third type are electric vehicles. They have no gasoline engine whatsoever, and as a result, they have the best fuel economy, not surprisingly. And the batteries of these cars are larger still, typically storing from 40 to 80 kilowatt hours of energy. And there are ones that are even bigger than that. So the latter two categories that I've been mentioning, the plug-in hybrid and the electric vehicle, are grouped together in the green there on the screen. They're called plug-in electric vehicles, or PEVs. And as the name states, both of these types of cars can plug into an outlet to charge the battery or a dedicated charging port. So PEVs are the type of vehicles that are eligible, possibly, for governmental financial incentives. Hybrids are no longer. Years ago they were, but not anymore. So how does this sort of turn into lower cost of operation? There are some great online cost calculators that I've found. Each one is a little bit different. I have one for each kind of car. The first one is the hybrid cost calculator, which compares a hybrid you're considering buying with its closest possible match in a non-hybrid model. For example, in the screenshot you can see here, I've compared a Toyota RAV4 XLE all-wheel drive hybrid to its equivalent gas-powered model, which is everything but the hybrid in the name, the RAV4 XLE AWD. So if you're looking at plug-in hybrids and electric cars, we also have some excellent tools here that you can use to calculate some costs. And in particular, I like the Choose EV Savings Calculator, the third item on the list. It allows you to compare an electric vehicle with a gasoline car, maybe that you're currently driving or considering for purchase, and can give you an idea of what kind of savings you're going to get by going electric. And at one point, you might break even and start saving money because of that decision. So I think these are useful tools. A common question is, well, how are they selling in the United States? And I have a couple charts here. The first one shows hybrid, plug-in hybrid, and electric car sales per year. And if you take all those in combination, you'll see that there's a general upward trend in in sales as time goes by for these electrified cars. If you look at the middle bar, which is the year 2018, it was a very interesting year. The yellow segment of that bar, which represents electric vehicles, is much greater than the previous year. And this is because of the Tesla Model 3. The cars started to hit the road in 2018, and it was really a game changer for electric vehicles. And Susan will be talking more about that later. Plug-in hybrids, which on this bar graph on the left are in the dark orange, they had a good year in 2018 as well. But since then, they haven't been quite as popular. Regular hybrids, though, have sold very well since 2018. If you look on the rightmost chart, that shows for 1 year what the mix of sales was. So in 2020, standard hybrids accounted for roughly 60% of the electrified vehicle market, and electric cars were next, solidly in the mix at 32%, and plug-in hybrids brought up the rear at 9% of electrified vehicles. In year-over-year sales results recently, compared to 2020, the quarter one of 2020 versus quarter one of 2021, they've really rebounded after a little bit of a doldrums due to COVID, most likely. They show 80% growth from quarter to quarter, year over year. And this, I think, bodes well for continued success in the future. The next thing I'd like to talk about is the Pew Research study that was done in this year, and they surveyed a bunch of people, very reputable firm, to see how likely were people to consider an electric vehicle. That was one of the questions they asked. So I think people really in the United States are starting to take notice of these vehicles, and 39% of the people surveyed said that they were somewhat or very likely to consider an electric or plug-in hybrid vehicle in the future. And millennials are even more enthusiastic about this, with 47% of them fitting those criteria of somewhat likely or likely to purchase or to consider an electric or plug-in hybrid vehicle. And finally, people that currently own hybrids or electric vehicles are very comfortable with the idea of considering them in the future. So 72% of people that currently have a more fuel efficient car now would be likely to consider one in the future. We do have a ways to go, though, compared to some of the rest of the world. In Northern Europe, if you look at the chart on the right, Norway, for example, 75% of all vehicle sales are electric. And if you compare that number to the United States, you'll see us at 2%. So I think as our infrastructure to support charging these vehicles in public places increases, we'll see us start to catch up, but we do have a ways to go. So now I'd like to start off our discussion looking at some specifics about hybrids and tell you some of their characteristics and advantages, disadvantages, that sort of thing. So hybrid characteristics, you'll find that they have an electric motor. As I mentioned before, it switches on periodically to supplement the main gas engine. And the range, as I mentioned before, is only 1 mile if you're on electricity only. And it uses something called regenerative braking to recharge on the go, where it's capturing some of the energy that would normally be lost in your brakes due to heat. They're capturing that and turning it into electricity. And Susan will talk a little bit more about that later. There is definitely no plug-in capability for hybrids. So advantages of hybrids are they have a relatively low cost compared to some of the other options. So the premium that you're paying for this over a gasoline powered engine is not that great typically. You know, it might be $1,000 or $2,000, something in that ballpark, but it varies widely. They do provide a nice moderate boost to fuel economy. So as a guess, I'd say typically you might see something like 45% or 50% improvement over the same model that that you might have otherwise. I take that back. Over a typical gasoline-powered car, not the same model. When the car is using electric propulsion, you might find that it actually it feels a little peppier. It's got more torque. The pulling sensation that you get when you accelerate hard, sometimes that's better when you're using the electric part of a powertrain. And these cars, these hybrids, have pretty good cruising range on a tank of gas. So they're pretty well suited for road trips. And of course, you have to look at how easy they are to refuel. There are gas stations all over the place in the United States. So it's easy to find a gas station. It's easy to fill up in 5 or 10 minutes, and you're good to go. And the same isn't necessarily true for our other options. But it's not all great for hybrids. Essentially, one thing that you might want to think about is the powertrain since it has that electric motor and the gasoline motor, there are more parts in them that something could go wrong, essentially. Although certain models like the Toyota Prius proven to be pretty reliable, so it's not like a guaranteed thing that you're going to have problems. It's just something to think about. And compared to the other two options that we're going to discuss, these hybrids have relatively low fuel economy. And we got to talk about the battery and when it might wear out. And they do wear out. The great news is most manufacturers are offering extended warranties on the battery to sort of alleviate fears that consumers might have on a pricey replacement battery. I think I looked at a Toyota Prius hybrid battery replacement. It could cost you anywhere from $2,000 to $5,000. And that's for a relatively small battery. You can imagine if you had a plug-in hybrid or an electric car, what the battery might cost to replace that. So it's something to think about, in particular if you're a second owner maybe of the car, or you plan to keep using a car like this for over 10 years, it might come up. And finally, I'll mention that the gasoline engine in some of these hybrids can be kind of noisy, especially when you're accelerating hard. Because they're designed for great fuel economy, they don't place a premium on how smooth the engine is and how good it sounds. They're very utilitarian gasoline engines in these hybrids, so it can be kind of noisy when you hit the gas. I want to talk about one particular hybrid model that I think is really interesting, and that is not a car at all. It's a truck. The 2022 Ford Maverick is a really interesting proposition. And I think it's interesting because it's hitting a really low price point. It starts at less than $20,000, which is crazy for a hybrid. Even well equipped, it's a lot less than $30,000. And of course, you can find there are many other hybrid options that are available under $30,000, but very few of them offer the practicality that a four-door Ford Maverick with a 4.5-foot bed can offer. It's kind of like a cheaper version of an SUV that doesn't necessarily have a covered cargo area. But I think it does have additional cargo space under the rear seats, which, I mean, you could put some groceries in there or hide some valuables while you're going into Chicago or something. But people that have never considered a car, I think, considered a truck, might consider this particular truck because it's so groundbreaking. I think it'll sell very well. So the next category of electrified vehicles is called plug-in hybrids, and they're sometimes abbreviated to PHEV, plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. And hybrid electric vehicles, which I didn't mention, are sometimes called HEVs, hybrid electric vehicles. So plug-in hybrids, they have a few characteristics that are interesting. Most of them, at least in their default mode, will try to use electric power as much as they can. So if you have charged your vehicle overnight and you start it up and you leave the driveway, it's probably going to be in electric only mode. And it goes in that electric only mode for the duration of the battery, which again could be 20 miles, 30 miles, 40 miles, 50 miles. Um, so if you choose your vehicle carefully, you might find that you rarely use the gasoline engine. I mean, so rarely that you might only fill up once or twice a year. It's incredible. Like standard hybrids, of course, plug-in hybrids use the same sort of regenerative braking to charge on the go. But if you're relying on your wall charger or a charger in a public place, if you have a Type 2 connection, and Susan's going to talk about this, um, which is kind of a high voltage connection, it will take about 3 to 5 hours to fully charge from empty. One thing I want to mention is this idea that basically a plug-in hybrid car becomes a hybrid if you just use all the gasoline up. You can treat it just like, or use all the electricity up. So you never have to plug it in. You can just run it on the gasoline engine, and that'll charge your plug-in hybrid battery. And dealers will tell you that they're basically the same thing. You're getting the best of both worlds if you buy a plug-in hybrid and treat it like a regular hybrid. And that's not exactly the case. I mean, technically it can do that, but it's not a good idea because these vehicles, the plug-in hybrids, weigh, maybe 500, 600, 700 pounds more than their regular hybrid counterparts. So you're dragging all that extra weight along with you as you're going on your trip, and that really can make the fuel economy suffer. But you might be tempted because with the $7,500 tax credit, a plug-in hybrid cost could get in the same ballpark as a regular hybrid. But just keep in mind that it's not great to lug around all that weight and drag the engine down with the fuel economy. I guess another way of looking at it is if you, even though these plug-in hybrids are very high tech, the efficiency at which they can recharge using gasoline is not nearly as good as we get from the electric grid in the United States. That's very efficient. Gasoline recharging is not so efficient. So looking at some particular advantages of plug-in hybrids, since they have a large battery, you may very well never need to go to the gas station. With a 40-mile range, a lot of our commutes could be soaked up in that, or maybe the errands you're running on the weekend. You just drive it and you plug it in when you get home, and that's all there is to it. It's very convenient. These vehicles are also pretty quiet when they're in electric only mode. People that have these really enjoy that. So unless you really get past that depleted battery stage when the gasoline engine kicks in, it's going to be a very serene driving experience. You'll get a very nice boost to your fuel economy. So estimates typically for these kind of vehicles are in the 80 to 100 effective miles per gallon. They try to convert stored electricity into sort of gasoline terms that people understand. And 80 to 100 miles per gallon is pretty good. It could be 200 to 300% better than what you have right now. And as with hybrids, plug-in hybrids have these engines that might provide more torque, making them more fun to drive. And finally, the total range of these cars is quite impressive, and they can be an excellent choice if you take a lot of long journeys. But your mileage on these highway sort of journeys is going to be lower than if you're in the city, because in the city you can take advantage of the start and stop traffic to regenerate power into your batteries, and on the highway you don't have that so much. As with regular hybrids, there are disadvantages to plug-in hybrids. Oops, got to go back. There's a higher upfront cost to these cars. They could be $10,000 or $11,000 or $12,000 more than the hybrid version of the same car, which is not great. Again, there are more moving parts with both electric and gas going on. And in order for them really to be a reasonable alternative, you need to have access to a charging station daily, if not, or every other day, if not daily. And many experts agree that to make the most sense, you really need to have this in your home so you can use that home electric overnight power that's relatively inexpensive. And as with the hybrids, when the battery dies, it can be very expensive to replace out of warranty. So the quick look I'd like to do for plug-in hybrids is the Toyota RAV4 Prime. I think this is interesting because it gets a lot of positive reviews in the press. It's a 40-mile on electric power range, which is kind of at the top of the category for small SUVs like this. And everybody that reviews it talks about how it's really quick and it gets up and goes. It has 300 horsepower, and it's the second quickest car in Toyota's lineup, behind the Supra. Yeah, sorry. So, I mean, that's pretty impressive. There's not like a Super Camry that you can buy with a big engine that would be faster. This car is the second fastest in Toyota's lineup. And I will mention that this vehicle in particular seems to have kind of a loud engine, a gasoline engine. So once you're out of that range where you're in electric mode, it can be a little noisy. And I think as you're looking at all of these hybrid and plug-in hybrids, you just should pay attention to that to see if it's going to be annoying, because it's so peaceful when you're in electric mode. And then if you punch the gas or something, it might really kick in and disturb the mood. So that is the RAV4. Susan is going to talk about electric cars next.
Thanks, Mike. So battery-powered electric vehicle, BEV, is what all electric cars are better known as. I'm going to just refer to them as EVs or electric cars, but know that I'm talking about vehicles that are powered 100% by a battery and have no gasoline component to them whatsoever. So as you can imagine, there's a lot to consider when talking about battery powered vehicles. And that is because you don't have the safety net of, oops, we've run out of electricity in our battery. We're going to move over, stop and get some gas at the gas station. So I'm going to talk hopefully about all of the things that you'll want to consider if you're thinking about purchasing an electric vehicle, or if you're just curious about what electric vehicles are and what they're all about. As Mike pointed out, electric cars are growing in popularity, and this is due to several factors, the concern over the environment being one of them, and the impact of emissions on the climate. Another reason they've become more popular is because battery technology has improved. And so you are able to drive farther on a single charge than you were when electric vehicles first came out. Another reason, as Mike alluded to with the Model 3 Tesla, is that some lower cost models are beginning to enter the market. So you don't have to pay quite as much as you did originally. The Tesla Model 3, the Chevy Bolt, the Nissan Leaf, the Hyundai Ioniq are a couple of the models that are at the lower price point for electric vehicles. In addition, there has been a growth in the amount of charging stations that are available. Maybe you've seen them popping up around town or out when you're running errands, but along the highway as well, there are more and more charging stations coming online, giving you more opportunity to charge as you're taking a longer road trip. But no matter how you slice it, buying an electric car is definitely different than buying a traditional car. So let's get into some of the things that you will want to think about. So first of all, you have to understand that the driving experience in an electric car is different from that in a gas car. And at first blush, it sort of is a little closer to feeling like a golf cart than an actual car. And that is because when you take your foot off the gas, the car stops. It doesn't just coast or idle, it truly stops. And this is the regenerative braking system that Mike alluded to earlier that is used in electric vehicles. With electrified vehicles, the electric motor drives the wheels. And as you drive forward, the motor runs in that direction, supplying the electric power to the wheels. But when you decelerate by taking your foot off the throttle, the electric motor stops supplying vehicle power, and the vehicle will slow down. When the motor stops, it immediately disengages, which means it immediately stops, and then starts running backwards. Since the transmission is still in drive, it doesn't reverse the wheels, but instead it acts like a generator, and it captures this kinetic energy from the wheels as they slow down, and it converts it into electricity that goes back to the battery. So this is the regenerative aspect of the brake. What this means is that when you drive an electric vehicle, you will quickly learn that you release the gas pedal gradually to slow down to your stop. And you may rarely actually use the brake pedal. And there is a friction brake pedal, but you may not even need to use that most of the time. Another difference is the construction of the car. The batteries for electric vehicles are not under the hood as they are in our gas-powered cars. They're much larger, and therefore they are, a lot of them are located in, the cells are underneath the chassis along the bottom of the car. And the nice thing about this is if you picture it, it's like a weight under the entire body of the car. And it is low to the ground and it's evenly distributed. And so this is going to improve traction and give you a better drive overall. There are a growing number of different electric cars on the market now. And when you begin the process of determining first whether purchasing an electric vehicle is right for you, and then which one you should purchase, there are four main things that you're going to want to consider. And I'm going to go through each one individually. The range is how far the car will travel on a charge. And that's probably one of the most important considerations. Since charging stations are not located on every corner like gas stations, you will likely need to plan your charges more carefully. That makes charging, specifically how you charge your car, another important consideration. So whether you charge it at a charging station when you're out and about or charging it at home. Another thing you'll want to think about is maintenance. The maintenance in electric vehicles is significantly less than that in gas engines. These motors don't require oil changes, spark plug replacements, oil or gas filter changes. The maintenance requirements or lack thereof will often help potential owners in their decision-making process of whether or not this is a good option for you. And probably one of the second biggest or biggest considerations of purchasing an electric vehicle is the cost. Typically, electric vehicles are significantly more expensive than traditional cars, and I'll get into that in a little bit. And the longer the range, meaning the bigger the battery and the farther, therefore, it can go on a charge, the higher the price because you're paying for that battery. Electric vehicles are more expensive up front, but they are a fraction of the cost to own once you've purchased them. And that is because you're not going to be paying for gas, and maintenance costs are going to be a lot lower too. So let's take a deeper dive into each one of these considerations and kind of go through them one by one. So let's start with range, or how far the car will travel on a charge. So range can typically vary between somewhere around maybe a little under 200 miles on a single charge to well over 400 miles on a single charge. So that's a pretty significant difference if you think about it. And typically when they say that the range of the car is 293 miles, what that means is in ideal circumstances, just like when you're buying a gas car, you probably aren't going to get that actual range as you're driving it around. So just keep that in mind, because that's a little surprising. So before purchasing, you're going to want to think about how you're going to be using your electric vehicle to determine if it's for you. If you're mainly driving under 100 miles per day, an electric vehicle would work very well for you. If you're driving longer distance with regularity, you might want to look into the charging options and think through this carefully before you go ahead and make your purchase. In terms of range, like I said, the range that the manufacturer is going to give you when you're looking at the car is going to be under ideal circumstances. But there are things that are going to affect the range of the car. Temperature is one of them. Cold weather can substantially drop your vehicle's range. So the Idaho National Labs did a study, and they found that electric vehicles can lose up to 25% of its rated range, what the manufacturer says is its range, when temperatures are below freezing. So cold weather will definitely take off a significant chunk of the, and by cold weather, it's got to be very cold weather, but it will definitely take off a chunk of the battery's capabilities. And going the other way, the study also found that fast charging, those supercharging stations, that it was 35% less efficient at freezing temperatures. So you're going to get a slower charge when it's really cold out as well, when you're trying to fill up the battery. That said, I will say that newer electric vehicles are better able to handle the cold than older ones. And as they become better and better and better at the battery technology, the effectiveness of the batteries is going to improve, and you're going to see that be one area of improvement. Speed is another thing that will affect the battery range. Electric vehicles consume significantly more of their battery when they're at a steady speed and on the highway. So in a conventionally fueled car, 50 miles per hour is the optimal speed for efficiency, but that's not the case in an electric vehicle. The faster you go, the more energy you consume. And if you're not using those regenerative brakes, you're also not going to be getting the charge back from braking. And so setting your car on cruise control, 70 miles per hour on the highway, you're really going to deplete the battery's efficiency. The driving style, the way that you drive, can also affect the range. The way that you make your electric vehicle stop can help your range. So as I mentioned before with the regenerative braking, if you don't use your brake and you just pull off on the gas in order to stop, that's going to turn your stopping into an electric charge for the car, and it is going to boost your battery. It takes some getting used to, but it can make a real difference. And you can see it show up on the gauge on your dashboard. Another thing that will affect your battery is heating and cooling your car. They're going to use the battery. So unlike in gas cars, in a combustion engine where you have a lot of heat waste and that's used to warm the car, and you have belt-driven accessories that will compress the refrigerant for cooling, electric cars have to use electricity for both. So a 2019 study done by AAA looked at 5 different models of electric cars and found that a 20-degree weather can shorten an electric vehicle's range by about 41% when the heater is on. So just using the heater when it's 20 degrees out will reduce your battery. In addition, cooling your engine or cooling your cabin will also reduce its a range by around 17%. Again, electric vehicle manufacturers are rapidly innovating in this area. So, for example, the Nissan Leaf, the Jaguar I-Pace, both use a heat pump system that Jaguar claims will add 30 miles of range to the car. So they are aware of this problem. They are addressing it and making improvements pretty quickly. A tip, if you do end up getting an electric vehicle, is to precondition your car. In other words, turn on the heat or turn on the air conditioning at home while the car is still plugged in and attached to your grid. And you can get the car cooled or heated and do the really hardest part of climatizing your car without using the battery power of the car to start the trip off. The last thing that's going to affect your range is the age of the battery in your car. And as Mike said, batteries are gradually going to lose capacity, just like any other battery operated device that you own. There are ways to extend the life of your battery, dealing mostly with the charging habits that you use. And that brings me to my next topic, and that is charging. There are several considerations relating to charging that are going to factor into your electric car purchase. One is where you charge it. Are you going to charge it at home? Are you going to rely on charging it at a supercharger or at the mall charging station? How long it takes to charge it, and then also the cost. How much does it cost to charge your car? So I'll try to tackle all of these. But we have to start with a basic understanding of charging. The time that it takes to charge your electric vehicle is going to depend on how much energy is being transferred in the charging cable. There are 3 types of chargers for electric cars. A level 1 charger refers to like a household 3-prong outlet like your computer would use or a desk lamp. Typically, those outlets or types of plugs carry about 120 volts of power. So this means that it takes about an hour to gain 4 miles of charge. So for every hour that you charge it, you're going to get 4 miles. If you only need to add 20 or 30 miles while you're at work, this might suffice, but it's going to take a really long time to fully charge your car battery if you're using one of those 3-prong outlets. So level 1 is nice in a pinch, but that's not what you're going to want to use on a day-to-day basis. Next comes level 2. And most people prefer level 2 charging at home or at a public charging station. And that is because these chargers will provide you with 240 volts of power and will add about 25 miles of charge per hour. So it's significantly more than the level 1 charging. So a 240 volt charging station is going to be similar to a receptacle like your electric clothes dryer uses. And you can actually unplug your clothes dryer and you could use that plug if it would be convenient to charge your car. And you're going to get that same level 2 charging. Typically, the clothes dryers are about 220 to 240 volts, so it's going to be very similar. You can also, though, install a home charging system that is in your garage that is 240 volts and hooked up to your outlet box, and that would be a way to go as well. There are also level 3 charging stations. These are not stations you're going to have at home. These are the super fast charging stations, and they can typically add hundreds of miles of range much faster. So Tesla, for example, has a network of these superchargers that claim to add 200 miles in only 15 minutes. And so these are going to be the chargers that you're going to use if you're driving on the highway and taking a road trip and you have to stop and get a charge, but you don't want to sit there for hours while your car charges. So Tesla's been pretty smart about putting these out at key places along the highways to try to encourage folks to buy electric cars by making it a lot easier to get a fast charge when you're driving. These level 3 options, like I said, are public charging stations, and they typically will charge you to use. So they're around 11 cents per kilowatt. And what that means is for a 50 kilowatt battery, the cost is going to be around $5.79. And a 50 kilowatt battery is typical for like a 200 range electric car. For a longer range, like an 82 kilowatt battery, which is going to be more like a 300 to 400 mile range car, the cost is going to be about $9.50 for a full charge. Still, it's significantly less than a gas fill-up, particularly with gas prices today. So where you charge could be at home, it could be at a public charging station, or it could be at a supercharging station. Let me mention that the public charging stations that you see when you're out, the Volta stations, you might see them at Brook Mall, or I know they're down like by Panera and Starbucks in Willowbrook. Those are going to be 240 volt stations. They're not the supercharging stations, and they're free. Also, I want to mention that when you do charge at home, it's inexpensive, and most electric car owners say they really don't notice an increase in their electric consumption just from charging their vehicles. So it's not that big of a financial burden on you to charge at home other than getting the charging station installed. Supercharging stations are the fastest, but you're going to have to pay for those. That said, at a supercharging station, it's still a fraction of the cost of gas. So as I alluded to earlier, how you charge your electric battery can also impact the health of your car. Like other electric equipment that you use where you charge the battery, like your cell phone, if your battery is not treated well, it's going to overall lose its ability to hold a charge, and that's going to decrease. So most electric vehicle manufacturers recommend that you actually don't fully charge your electric vehicle battery. They recommend keeping it somewhere between 20% at the low end and 80% at the high end. So you don't want to let it drop below a 20% charge, and you don't want to charge it over 80% on a regular basis. That said, if you're taking a road trip, every once in a while, charging to 100% is acceptable. But if you, on a day-to-day basis, try to keep it between that 80 and 20% charge, you're going to prevent degradation of the battery. So one of the concerns of new electric car owners related to range and charging is known as range anxiety, or worry about running out of a charge and not being near a charging station. So most electric car manufacturers recognize this and have helped ease this concern by offering trip planning services. So this is an example of a trip that I planned using the Tesla trip planning app. And I will say that I'm going to talk a lot about Tesla, and that is because right now at this point in time, Tesla really has done the most in terms of making driving an electric car an easier shift from a gas car. And their trip planning software is much better than any of the others out there. So that's why I'm using it. So for this particular plan, I entered in the address of the library, and I entered in my destination as being Cleveland, Ohio, as just an example. In this case, I chose Cleveland, which is typically it's about a 6-hour drive, and it's roughly 360 miles. All of this not including stops, and I base this off of what Google Maps suggested. So using the Model 3 Tesla, you enter in what model you want in your trip planning. I entered the Model 3 and the long range, meaning the one that they have a couple different models, and I chose the one that is supposed to go further per charge. This trip plan shows that I'm going to have 2 stops on my route. It shows me exactly where I'm going to stop, and then it tells me how long to charge at that stop. So the first stop here is in, I believe it's in Indiana, and it's going to be a 10-minute charge. And the second stop is in Ohio, and it's going to be a 20-minute charge. And then I'm going to get on my way and make it to Cleveland with my car, and I'm not going to run out of charge. All of this is programmed into the computer that's actually in the car. So you can enter all of your destination in the car before you leave, and it's going to feed you all this information as you're driving. They've got a big navigation screen. If the conditions change, if you have stop and go traffic somewhere, or if something changes as you're driving, then the computer is going to update in real time, and it's going to recalibrate where your stops should be and the length of the stops based upon the current conditions. If your charge becomes really low, very low, it's going to alert you and identify where you need to go to get that charge to make sure that you don't run out of electricity. It's important to note that as electric cars grow in popularity, the charging locations continue to increase and they continue to improve. They become faster. So for example, in the past, if 2 cars were plugged into the same Tesla supercharger, it would double the amount of time it took to charge. But Tesla's latest supercharging stations will allow more than 1 car to plug into them without affecting the charge time. So as you begin to think about whether an all-electric car is going to fit your driving needs, you'll definitely want to consider how you're going to be driving your car, how its range and how its charging is going to factor into it. In addition to this Tesla planning app, there are other generic online electric vehicle trip planning apps. But at this point, this Tesla has arguably done the best job at baking this technology into the car itself, rather than relying on an outside app. So that's one reason Teslas are so popular. So back to optimizing the battery life of your electric vehicle. The first, as I mentioned, you want to keep your battery's state of charge between 20 and 80% whenever possible. As I mentioned, repeatedly charging the battery to full will cause it to degrade more quickly. And that's also true of leaving the battery at a low state of charge for an extended period of time. Most electric vehicles will help you out. They have a setting that will allow you to choose when you'd like the battery to start charging, so at what percentage, and then how full you'd like to charge it to. So if you're going on a long road trip, you can set it to 100%, but otherwise you may want to leave it at 80% and just charge to that point. When you're done driving for the day, you simply plug your car in at home, and it should be adequately replenished by the time you're ready to use it the next day. At this point, are there any questions about charging or range before I move on to maintenance? Okay, if not, I'm going to move on and talk about the maintenance of an electric vehicle. A notable benefit of driving the electric vehicle is the significantly lower maintenance needs. Electric vehicles have powertrains that are much simpler than an internal combustion engine. They have significantly fewer parts, and those parts are much smaller and lighter. In fact, electric motors are so light that they can be carried by one person. And this is obviously because of the fact that they're battery operated. As I said earlier, they don't require oil changes. They don't require spark plugs. They don't require oil or gas filter changes. They don't rely on a complicated multi-speed transmission because they used what they call a fixed ratio direct drive setup. In short, there aren't gears. There's no exhaust system, muffler, catalytic converter, fuel injector, or fuel pump. So there's a lot of things that typically have to be maintained or replaced in a gas car that you don't have to even think about in an electric car. They do have brakes, but because of the regenerative braking, they're not used as often. And therefore, typically they're not replaced until around 100,000 or 100,000 miles, 100,000 miles. So that's much different than your usual car. Tires, washer fluid, wiper blades, these are the primary maintenance costs, and these are going to be the same as they would with a gas vehicle. In terms of maintenance specific to the electric vehicle, the battery pack is the largest and the most expensive and most critical component in an electric vehicle. So it is crucial that you take care of your battery and you charge it and have good charging habits. Let's see. And the other thing you need to know is that the maintenance costs, in addition to the maintenance costs, the warranties in electric vehicles are arguably better than most gas-powered car warranties. And that is because they cover the most vital and expensive component for a very long time. Specifically, federal regulations mandate that electric vehicles come with a battery warranty that lasts 8 years or 100,000 miles, and many manufacturers actually go beyond that. So you are protected with your battery, and that is really to help encourage people to not be afraid of it. I want to point out in this graphic, if you can look, the BEV is the battery, or it's a fully electric car. And if you see here the cost of maintenance, you take out all of this red area, you take out most of the purple area and a lot of the green area. So you really can see here that there's a lot less maintenance, scheduled maintenance that needs to occur with the electric vehicle, not to mention the unexpected things that break and that need to get repaired. So there's no getting around the fact that they come at a higher price tag than traditional internal combustion engines. The cost of the battery and the technology of the car is really one of the reasons. Another reason is right now, the demand is really outstripping the supply. They can't be made fast enough. I know for Teslas, there's you order your car and it's, a 10 to 16 week wait period until you actually get it because there's so many people that are getting them right now. The other thing with an electric vehicle is that as you increase the range of the vehicle, you're going to get a bigger battery, and because of that, the cost is going to go up. So the bigger the range, the bigger the price tag. However, if you take a long range look at the cost of owning an electric vehicle, you might be surprised to know that you, in most cases, will recoup those higher upfront costs within about 5 to maybe 8 years for some of the lower cost electric cars. And this factors in both the decreased costs that you're going to have for fuel and also the decreased maintenance costs. You're definitely going to notice that the annual costs of owning an electric vehicle compared to a gas car are much lower. So you'll pay more upfront, but then each year you're going to be paying less overall. There are also a wide range of price points. So starting on the lower end with cars like the Mini Cooper, the Nissan Leaf, the Hyundai Ioniq, the Tesla Model 3, and the Chevy Bolt. And all of those start under 40K. There are some midpoint vehicles, such as the BMW 3i, the Polestar 2, and Tesla Model S. Those all are under $75,000. And then there are, of course, higher end, the Porsche and others that cost $80,000 and above. So there are different options, different price points depending on what you're looking for. So just in looking at, and Mike kind of alluded to this earlier, looking at the sales of electric vehicle cars in 2020 by model, you can really see that the top three cars that were bought in 2020 were Teslas. And even if you go over to this graph on the right, if you look at the sales of electric cars, each one of these colors represents a different model of a car. You get to 2018 and you see that this is the Tesla Model 3 when it came out, and it really just spiked the sales of electric vehicles. That's because it's Tesla's most accessible model, and its range per charge is still, you know, the longest available, pretty much. So I thought it would make sense to do a quick look at the Tesla Model 3, just to kind of look at it. Basically, there are three options: the standard range, the long range, and the performance. But before I even get into that, I did include a picture of the dashboard because I was talking about the technology. And you'll notice there's nothing on the dashboard but this giant screen. And that is how you operate everything within the car. The music, the air conditioning, you know, anything that you want to, the gear, you know, whether you're in park, reverse, drive, it's all operated right here on this computer screen. And it is also all voice activated. So you don't even have to look at the screen. You can tell it to increase the temperature. You can tell it to decrease the temperature. You can tell it to put on music. You can tell it you want to go to Cleveland and it will map you. You can ask it where the nearest charging station is. It's all done with voice recognition as well. So it's a pretty nifty setup. So back to the three models of Tesla. The standard range starts at 39, just under $40,000. You can get about 263 miles on a charge, and it is a real rear-wheel drive car. Now, that's pretty scary in our weather in the winter, but I want to remind you, it does not have an engine or a heavy engine in the hood of the car. Most of its weight is evenly distributed underneath the car, so really having a rear wheel is not a huge detriment at all, and doesn't affect the functioning of the car very much, if at all. The long range version of the Model 3 is $10,000 more than the standard range, and that gets you almost a little over 350 miles on a single charge. It is a little peppier. You can get a little bit more acceleration in it, and it is an all-wheel drive car as opposed to the rear-wheel drive car. And then lastly, the performance model of the car is basically, it's going to give you more pep. It has a slightly lower range. It's also all-wheel drive, but it has a bigger engine and more pep.
I'll just jump in here real quick if you don't mind, Susan. For those of you who aren't familiar with like car statistics and 0 to 60 times, like even the standard range Model 3, 5.3 seconds for 0 to 60 is quite quick, and 3.1 seconds in the performance model, that's insanely quick. I mean, that'll punch you back into your seat. It's so fast. I just wanted to add that.
Well, and I will say that I test drove the performance model Tesla Model 3, and it is very peppy. It's a really fun car to drive. I can say that from firsthand knowledge. The other thing with the Tesla, then you're going to pay, there's some upcharges for various options. So these are the prices if you get a white Tesla with a black interior. If you want any other colors, there's an upcharge for those. If you want a white interior, there's an upcharge for that. You can get different wheels. There's an upcharge for that. And then you can also get a full self-driving capability package, which is $10,000. And that's going to give you the ability that when it's in that, Tesla has an autopilot mode. And when it's in that mode, it will navigate. It will, they have cameras that surround the car, and that the car will be smart enough to know when to change lanes to go around cars all on its own. You can also summon the car with this $10,000 package, and it will leave its parking space and come to where you are all on its own. So if that's something that's important to you and sounds like fun, then that is something that you can add on to your, and that's available on all Tesla models, not just the Model 3. So I wanted to close though with what's coming down the pike, because these electric cars are really being churned out. New cars are coming out pretty rapidly on the market. And there are some exciting new cars that are going to be coming out that are not available yet, but you may want to keep an eye out on. So let me just quickly go through these. I know we're probably running a little long on time. So BMW has a new model coming out. I believe it's coming out in spring of 2022. It's the BMW iX. This is the newest flagship electric car. It was built purely to be an electric car from BMW. It's expected to have about a 300-mile range, and its cost is looking somewhere between $80,000 to $100,000. A little less, Kia has a new car that's going to be coming out soon. This is the Kia EV6. And it's the first Kia that was designed from the ground up as well to be fully electric. It will not have any other options available. The neat thing about this Kia is that it is has a unique feature in that it's capable of powering other equipment. So you can use it as an emergency power source for your home. If the power goes out, it can send electricity the other way. And this is expected to go on sale in January, and its price point is going to be somewhere between $45,000 and $55,000. I also want to mention the Subaru Solterra, which is the first electric car that Subaru is going to be coming out with. It was developed jointly with Toyota. There's not a lot of information about it. It's expected to come out in late 2022. So just keep an eye out for that. Industry insiders expect it's going to have around a 300-mile range. Another interesting car to keep an eye out on, and a whole range of cars actually, is Lucid. Lucid is a California-based electric car company. They're coming out with their first car later this year, the Lucid Air. It's going to be the highest end car of their lineup. It's meant to compete with Mercedes-Benz and the Tesla Model S, but it's going to eventually be offered then in other formats that are less expensive. But it was a car that was developed to directly compete with Tesla. So keep an eye out on Lucid. The first Lucid Air that is going to be released, like I said, it's a high end. It's going to be pretty expensive at about $170,000. But lower cost options will be following. So watch for it in the second half of the year. And real quickly, the Ford Lightning is going to be an electrified F-150 truck. So that will be the Ford pickup that you could get that's fully electric. It's expected to have a 300-mile range and is going to have depending on the how much horsepower and the battery size, it's going to range somewhere from $40,000 up to $90,000. And then lastly, I want to mention the Nissan Ariya. This is it's positioned to compete with the Tesla Model Y, but will be less expensive than it. It is a an SUV, and it's fully electric. It's going to be on sale late in the year, and it will cost between $40,000 and $50,000. And again, the range is somewhere in the vicinity of 300 miles. So that's what's coming down the pike. I hope that I was able to answer most of your questions about electric cars. But at this point, I think we can open it up to other questions.
We do have a question via chat, Susan. It says, what if you go to Florida for the winter? What happens if the car is not used for months at a time?
So that's a great question. And I don't know the answer. I'm assuming you're talking about a fully electric car, and I'm assuming you're worried about the battery. Gosh, that's a good question, and I don't have the answer for it. Mike, do you offhand know that either?
Well, I suppose I think it's not great for it, but if you charged it to 80% and then it loses about 1% per day, right? Just sitting there. So it would take, 80 days for it to drop down to zero. I mean, maybe you could have, if it was a Tesla, I think they're pretty sophisticated in terms of you could leave it plugged in and tell to charge at certain times. And it, I don't know about other vehicles, what their systems are like, but it's very sophisticated on the Tesla side of things.
Yeah, I think that's what you would do, is you'd leave it plugged in, because every electric vehicle has an app that will allow you to say what you want it charged to, and it can automatically then pick up and charge when it drops below the wherever you set the floor to be, whether it's 20% or and it would charge. I think we have another question about whether the slides will be available, and what we'll do is tomorrow we will email out the slide packet along with a link for the program evaluation, and so yes, we will make those slides available to you.
Are there any other questions about electric, hybrid, plug-in hybrid?
Do any of you have electric hybrids or plug-in hybrids? You feel free to unmic yourself too if you would like. So I'll take that as a no. So hopefully we've inspired you to at least get out there. And I recommend test driving these cars. The Tesla that I test drove was so quiet. The electric cars are really neat in that regard. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight. And like I said, tomorrow we'll send out the package of slides and an evaluation, and hope to hear back from you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a good night and happy driving.